Commander Zithara clicked his mandibles in frustration as he stared at the empty research pod. The human, Lila Nordstrom, had been scheduled to return from her botanical survey 3 hours ago. 3 hours. In Galactic Standard Time, that was practically an eternity for a species known for their obsessive punctuality. "Status report, Lieutenant Grex." Zithara's voice carried the weight of impending bureaucratic nightmares. Lieutenant Grex, a four-armed Veltarian with nervous twitches in all appendages, consulted his datapad with increasing panic. "Sir, the human's last transmission was at coordinates 77 Alpha. She reported finding, and I quote, some really funky mushrooms that smell like pizza. End transmission." Pizza? Zithara's eye stalks swiveled independently. What in the 7 moons of Casthar is pizza? According to the Human Cultural Database, it's a circular food item that apparently drives their species into states of euphoria, Grex replied, his voice cracking like a teenager asking someone to prom. Perfect. Just perfect. The one human assigned to his xenobiology team had gone missing while chasing aromatic fungi. The Galactic Council would have his chitinous hide if anything happened to their precious Earth ambassador, because naturally, losing the only member of a newly discovered species would look fantastic on his performance review. "Assemble a search team," Zithara commanded, already mentally drafting his resignation letter. "And somebody find out what a pizza smells like. Apparently, it's relevant to our investigation now." Meanwhile, roughly 12 kilometers away, Lila Nordstrom was having what could generously be described as a situation. She'd been following what appeared to be bioluminescent spores through increasingly dense undergrowth when the ground had quite literally disappeared beneath her feet. One moment she was admiring the local flora. The next she was tumbling down a steep embankment like a very confused boulder. "Well, this is just fantastic," she muttered, spitting out what tasted suspiciously like alien moss. Lost on an uncharted planet. My mother always said I'd amount to nothing, but I bet even she didn't predict this level of spectacular failure. The forest around her seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Towering trees with bark that shifted colors created a canopy so thick that only scattered beams of the twin suns penetrated to the forest floor. Everything glowed softly, as if the entire ecosystem had been dipped in highlighter fluid. As she dusted herself off, checking for broken bones or wounded pride, a sound made her freeze. It was soft, almost musical, but carried an undertone that made her human instincts scream, "Predator," in 17 different languages. "Okay, Lila," she whispered to herself. "You've watched enough documentaries to know that when you hear mysterious sounds in an alien forest, you're either about to discover something amazing or become something's lunch. Let's hope for option A." The sound came again, closer this time. A low, thrumming call that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. Lila's hand instinctively went to the emergency beacon clipped to her belt, but curiosity, that wonderfully terrible human trait, kept her from activating it immediately. She crept forward, pushing through what looked like ferns, but felt like silk ribbons against her skin. The undergrowth opened into a small clearing where the source of the sound became horrifyingly, wonderfully clear. 3 creatures, each about the size of a large dog, huddled together near what appeared to be their injured mother. The adult animal was magnificent, covered in fur that shifted from deep purple to silver depending on the angle of light. 6 legs ended in paws that looked like they could shred titanium, and a tail that branched into 3 separate appendages twitched weakly. The cubs, because that's clearly what they were, looked up at Lila with eyes that held far too much intelligence for comfort. They were making the musical sounds, but now she understood it wasn't hunting calls. They were crying. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Lila breathed. "I'm lost, probably being hunted by an alien search party, and now I'm face to face with what are essentially space wolves with abandonment issues." The mother lifted her head, fixing Lila with a gaze that seemed to look straight through her soul and out the other side. For a moment that lasted approximately forever, human and alien regarded each other. Then the great creature made a sound that was unmistakably a whimper. Lila's training kicked in. She was a xenobiologist after all. She'd studied animal behavior across 47 different species. This was clearly a maternal creature in distress, protecting her young. The intelligent response would be to back away slowly, activate her beacon, and let the professionals handle this. Instead, she took a step forward. Yeah, that's right, she said to herself. Because when faced with potentially dangerous alien wildlife, the best course of action is obviously to get closer. Darwin would be so proud. But something in the mother's eyes, some universal language of desperation that transcended species barriers, kept her moving forward. As she approached, she could see the problem. The creature's left hind leg was caught in what appeared to be some kind of biomechanical trap, probably left by illegal poachers. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent her entire career studying how species adapted to survive, and here she was, about to attempt amateur veterinary work on a creature that could probably bite her head off without much effort. Okay, beautiful, Lila said softly, her hands raised in what she hoped was a universal gesture of non-aggression. Let's see what we can do about this mess you've gotten yourself into. The creature watched her approach with wariness, but didn't growl or show any aggressive behavior. The cubs, however, seemed to have decided that Lila was either their salvation or their new favorite toy. They began making excited, chittering sounds and took tentative steps toward her. Great, Lila muttered. I'm being adopted by alien puppies. This is either going to be the best day of my life or the last day of my life, and I'm honestly not sure which outcome I prefer at this point. She knelt beside the trap, examining its mechanism. It was definitely artificial, made from some kind of adaptive metal that had clamped around the creature's leg and was slowly tightening. Whoever had designed this thing was either very clever or very cruel. Possibly both. You know what, Mom? Lila said, addressing the injured creature as she worked. I bet you weren't planning on having your day ruined by some idiot poachers either. We're both having a fantastic day, aren't we? The creature made a sound that, if Lila didn't know better, she'd swear was sarcastic agreement. As she worked on the trap's release mechanism, one of the cubs wandered over and began investigating her equipment pack with the kind of thorough attention usually reserved for tax audits. Another cub decided that her hair was fascinating and began gently pawing at it, while the third simply flopped down against her leg as if she'd been part of their family forever. Oh, wonderful, she said, trying to concentrate on the trap while a 60-pound alien cub used her as a pillow. I'm being claimed by space wolves. My insurance definitely doesn't cover this. The trap's mechanism was complex, but not impossible. It seemed to respond to bioelectric fields, tightening when it detected stress hormones. The more the trapped animal struggled, the tighter it became. Diabolically clever, really. Okay, pretty lady, Lila said to the mother. I need you to stay very, very calm. This thing feeds on panic, and right now, we're all going to pretend we're at a spa getting relaxing treatments. Can you do that for me? The creature's intelligent eyes seemed to understand, and Lila felt the tension in the clearing decrease slightly. Using a combination of her multi-tool and what she hoped was inspired improvisation, she began carefully disabling the trap's sensors. 20 minutes later, accompanied by a soundtrack of encouraging cub chatter and her own muttered commentary on the questionable life choices that had led her to this moment, the trap finally released with a soft click. The mother creature immediately tested her leg, flexing it carefully. When she determined it would bear weight, she did something that made Lila's heart skip several beats. The magnificent animal approached her, lowered her great head, and gently bumped Lila's shoulder in what was unmistakably a gesture of gratitude. Well, Lila said, her voice slightly unsteady, you're welcome. Though I have to say, this is definitely going in the Weird Tuesday category of my life experiences. The mother made a complex series of sounds to her cubs, who immediately began bouncing around Lila with even more enthusiasm. Then she looked at Lila again and made a different sound, one that carried a clear tone of invitation. Oh no, Lila said, backing away slightly. No, no, no. I know that look. That's the come home with us look. I've seen that look on every stray animal in the galaxy, and it never ends well for the human involved. But as she spoke, she realized she had a significant problem. In all the excitement of playing alien veterinarian, she'd completely lost track of which direction she'd come from. The forest looked identical in every direction, a maze of glowing plants and shifting shadows. She activated her emergency beacon, but the device just beeped sadly and displayed a message that, roughly translated, meant, "Good luck with that, you're on your own." The mother creature seemed to understand her dilemma. She made another sound, softer this time, and began walking slowly in a specific direction. The cubs immediately fell into formation around Lila, two flanking her sides and one taking up position behind her, as if they'd appointed themselves her personal escort service. "Really?" Lila asked the universe in general. "This is how it's going to be? I'm lost in an alien forest, and my only hope of getting back to civilization is following a family of space wolves who've apparently decided I'm their new pack member." The mother looked back at her and made a sound that was definitely amused. "Don't you laugh at me," Lila said, but she was fighting a smile. "This is a perfectly reasonable reaction to an unreasonable situation." As they began walking, Lila couldn't help but notice how the cubs stayed close to her, taking turns bringing her interesting-looking rocks or colorful flowers they found along the way. It was, she had to admit, rather endearing behavior for creatures that could probably hunt down a hover tank if they put their minds to it. "You know," she said to her new companions, "when I signed up for this expedition, the recruitment poster definitely didn't mention anything about becoming a foster parent to alien wildlife. I'm pretty sure that's a significant oversight in the job description." The mother led them through the forest with purpose, following paths that were invisible to human eyes but clearly well known to her. As they walked, Lila began to notice signs of intelligence in the environment itself. Trees were arranged in patterns that seemed too regular to be natural, and some of the bioluminescent plants appeared to be responding to their presence in coordinated ways. "This isn't just a forest," she realized aloud. "This is managed somehow. These creatures, they're not just living in this environment. They're part of it, possibly in charge of it." One of the cubs, apparently understanding her observation, made an approving chirp and presented her with what appeared to be a flower that was definitely not native to this region of the planet. It was from the area where she'd originally been conducting her survey. "You know where I came from," she said, looking at the mother creature with new respect. "You're taking me home, aren't you?" The great animal's eyes held what Lila could only describe as fond exasperation, as if she were dealing with a particularly slow student who had finally grasped an obvious concept. As they continued their trek through the forest, Lila found herself relaxing despite the surreal nature of her situation. The cub's constant chatter was oddly soothing, and the mother's steady presence gave her a sense of security she hadn't expected to feel while lost on an alien world. But as the twin suns began to set, casting long shadows through the forest canopy, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that this adventure was far from over. Something in the way the mother creature kept glancing at the darkening sky suggested that nighttime in this forest brought challenges that even a family of intelligent space wolves took seriously. "Please tell me," she said to her companions, "that whatever comes out after dark is the kind of thing we can handle with friendship and positive thinking." The mother's response was to quicken her pace significantly. "Right," Lila muttered, adjusting her pack and preparing for whatever came next. "Friendship and positive thinking it is, along with a healthy dose of running really, really fast." Behind them, the forest began to fill with new sounds as the creatures of the night stirred to life, and ahead of them, somewhere in the growing darkness, lay the path home. Back at the research station, Commander Zithara was having what could diplomatically be called a complete mental breakdown. The search teams had returned empty-handed, except for Lieutenant Grex, who'd somehow managed to fall into a bog and now smelled like fermented fruit. "Sir," reported Captain Vrel, a six-legged insectoid whose natural clicking had taken on distinctly nervous undertones. "We've covered a 40-kilometer radius, no sign of the human. However, we did find several illegal poaching traps in the southern quadrant." "Poaching traps?" Zithara's eye stalks nearly tied themselves in knots. "You mean to tell me that not only is our human missing, but she might have encountered devices specifically designed to capture and harm local wildlife?" That's essentially correct, sir," Vrel clicked miserably. Zithara stared at the tactical display, watching the search grid expand with no positive results. "In approximately 6 hours, He'd have to file a report with the Galactic Council explaining how he'd managed to lose the only human in this sector of space. The paperwork alone would probably kill him. "Sir?" Grex's voice interrupted his spiral into bureaucratic despair. "I'm picking up movement on the perimeter sensors. Multiple life forms approaching from the southeast." "More search teams returning?" Zithara asked hopefully. "No, sir. The biosignatures are unusual. One appears to be human, but the others—" Grex paused, recalibrating his instruments. "Sir, I'm reading 4 large quadrupedal life forms moving in formation with the human signature." "4 large? Are you telling me the human is being escorted by local wildlife?" "It appears so, sir, and they're moving at a steady pace directly toward our location." Zithara felt a headache building behind his compound eyes. Of course she is, because a simple rescue mission would be too straightforward for a human. They have to complicate everything. Meanwhile, Lila was discovering that traveling through an alien forest at night with a family of bioluminescent space wolves was simultaneously the most terrifying and most beautiful experience of her life. The cubs had developed a fascinating pattern of behavior, taking turns glowing brighter to light their path while the others conserved energy. "You know," she said to the mother, who had positioned herself protectively between Lila and the darker parts of the forest, "this whole glowing thing is incredibly convenient. Do you mind if I ask how that works, biologically speaking?" The mother made a sound that Lila was beginning to recognize as amusement, followed by a more complex vocalization that seemed to be directed at the cubs. Immediately, all 3 young ones began showing off, cycling through different colors and patterns like living disco balls. "Show-offs," Lila laughed. "I see intelligence, coordination, and a healthy dose of teenage attitude. You're basically space puppies with PhDs in being adorable." Her good mood faltered slightly as something large crashed through the underbrush nearby. The mother immediately went into protective mode, positioning herself between Lila and the sound while making a low growling noise that seemed to vibrate through the ground. "Okay," Lila whispered. "That's definitely not the friendly neighborhood welcome committee." What emerged from the darkness was something that looked like it had been designed by a committee of nightmares. 8 legs, each ending in razor-sharp claws, supported a body that was mostly teeth and bad intentions. Its eyes reflected the cub's bioluminescence like malevolent stars. "Well," Lila said with forced calm, "that's significantly less cuddly than my current companions." The creature let out a sound like metal being tortured, and Lila instinctively reached for her emergency flare. But before she could activate it, something extraordinary happened. The mother and her cubs moved into a formation that was clearly practiced and coordinated. The cubs positioned themselves in a triangle around the threat, while their mother approached it directly. But instead of attacking, she began making a series of complex vocalizations. "Are you negotiating with it?" Lila asked incredulously. The exchange continued for several minutes, with the nightmare creature's aggressive posture gradually relaxing. Finally, it made what sounded like a grudging agreement, and stalked back into the darkness. "Diplomatic immunity," Lila breathed. "You have diplomatic immunity in this forest. You're not just living here, you're running the place." The mother's response was definitely smug satisfaction. As they continued their journey, Lila began to piece together what she was seeing. The forest wasn't just an ecosystem, it was a society. The various species had established territories, agreements, and communication protocols, and her new family was clearly high-ranking members of this biological United Nations. "This is incredible," she said, more to herself than to her companions. "A multi-species cooperative society based on mutual benefit rather than competition. The xenobiology journals are going to go absolutely insane when I publish this." One of the cubs, apparently hearing the excitement in her voice, brought her another gift, this time a peculiar crystal that pulsed with soft light. "Thank you, sweetie," Lila said, examining the crystal. "Though I have to say, your gift-giving game is on point. Most humans your age just bring their mothers dead rodents." The cube made a sound that was definitely offended dignity. "Oh, I'm sorry," Lila said quickly. "I didn't mean to imply that dead rodents weren't thoughtful gifts. I'm sure they're very practical in the right circumstances. As they crested a small hill, Lila could see lights in the distance that definitely weren't biological in origin. The research station's landing beacon cut through the darkness like a mechanical lighthouse. There it is, she said, feeling a mix of relief and unexpected sadness. Home. Or at least, as close to home as I'm going to get on this planet. The mother made a questioning sound, and Lila realized she was being asked to make a choice. The great creature was offering to take her all the way to the station's perimeter, but clearly understood that doing so might complicate things for everyone involved. You're right, Lila said. Showing up with a family of unknown alien life forms probably wouldn't go over well with the welcoming committee. They tend to shoot first and ask questions during the paperwork phase. She knelt down and was immediately swarmed by 3 affectionate cubs who seemed to have decided that she needed a thorough goodbye grooming. The mother approached more sedately and once again bumped Lila's shoulder with her great head. Thank you, Lila said seriously. For everything. For trusting me. For helping me. For letting me be part of your family, even temporarily. The mother stepped back and made a complex series of sounds to her cubs. Lila watched in amazement as each of the young ones approached her and carefully placed something in her equipment pack. Crystals, unusual flowers, and what appeared to be intricately carved stones. Gifts, she realized. You're giving me gifts to take back with me. But the biggest surprise came when the mother approached her pack and carefully deposited something that made Lila's heart skip several beats. It was a small, perfectly preserved flower from the original survey site where she'd first gotten lost. You've been planning this, Lila said, understanding flooding through her. You knew where I was from the moment you saw me. You could have led me straight back to the station, but you took the long way around. You wanted me to see the forest, to understand what you'd built here. The mother's eyes held ancient wisdom and what Lila could only describe as hope. You want us to know, Lila continued, about the society you've created, about the cooperation between species. You want us to understand that intelligence comes in forms we haven't even imagined yet. The cubs made excited chittering sounds, apparently pleased that the slow human had finally figured out the plan. Well, Lila said, shouldering her pack carefully to avoid disturbing her new collection of alien artifacts. I promise you this. Everyone is going to know about this place, about what you've accomplished. But I'll make sure they understand that this is your home, your society, and it deserves respect. The mother made a sound of approval, then did something that nearly made Lila cry. She gently nudged each of her cubs forward, and they formed a line between Lila and their mother. Oh no, Lila said, understanding immediately. No, you can't be serious. But the cubs were already moving toward her, making soft pleading sounds that transcended species barriers. You want them to come with me, Lila said weakly. You want your children to go to the research station. The mother's response was firm and unmistakable. Yes. As what? Cultural ambassadors? Exchange students? Alien interns? The cubs were now clustered around her legs, looking up at her with expressions that somehow managed to be both innocent and manipulative. This is insane, Lila said to the universe in general. I'm a xenobiologist, not a babysitter. I study alien life forms. I don't adopt them. One of the cubs made a particularly pathetic sound, and somehow managed to make its eyes even larger and more appealing. Oh, that's not fair, Lila protested. That's emotional manipulation of the highest order. You can't just… Oh, for the love of… Fine, fine. But we're going to have some serious conversations about boundaries and appropriate behavior in a research facility. The cub's response was to immediately cluster around her more tightly, purring with satisfaction. Your mother raised you to be tiny sociopaths, Lila informed them. Adorable, bioluminescent sociopaths. The mother approached one final time and touched her nose to Lila's forehead, in what was clearly a blessing or benediction. Then, with a final call to her cubs that somehow conveyed both love and instructions for good behavior, she melted back into the forest shadows. Well, Lila said to her new charges, I guess we're doing this. Everyone stay close. Try not to glow too brightly until we figure out how to explain you. And for the love of all that's holy, please don't eat anyone at the research station. The return journey to the perimeter took another hour, during which Lila tried to figure out how she was going to explain her situation to Commander Zithara. 3 alien cubs had decided she was their new parent, and they'd apparently been given permission by their mother to become interspecies ambassadors. "This is going to be interesting," she muttered, as the station's lights grew brighter. The first sign that her return had been noticed came when her emergency beacon finally decided to work, immediately broadcasting her location to every receiver in a 50-kilometer radius. The second sign was the sound of multiple aircraft approaching at high speed. "Okay, guys," she said to the cubs, who were now trying to hide behind her legs while simultaneously being fascinated by the approaching lights. "Show time. Remember, we talked about this. You're not pets, you're not prisoners, you're guests. Very intelligent, very important guests." The first hovercraft to arrive contained Commander Zithara, who took one look at Lila surrounded by 3 glowing alien cubs and made a sound that was definitely not in any standard diplomatic protocol. "Nordstrom," he called out as his craft landed, "please tell me you have a reasonable explanation for why you're apparently traveling with what appear to be juvenile members of an unknown sapient species." "Well, sir," Lila called back, "define reasonable." Zithara's eye stalks drooped in what was clearly resignation. Just tell me they're friendly." As if on cue, all 3 cubs began glowing more brightly and making their musical greeting sounds. One of them, apparently deciding that first impressions were important, trotted over to Zithara's craft and presented him with a flower. "They're friendly," Lila confirmed. "Also intelligent, social, and apparently interested in cultural exchange programs." "Cultural exchange programs," Zithara repeated slowly. "Their mother is basically the forest's head of state," Lila explained. "These 3 are her children, and she's sent them as ambassadors to establish peaceful relations with our research mission." "The forest has a head of state." "The forest has an entire government, sir. Multi-species, cooperative, and based on principles that would make the Galactic Council weep with envy." Zithara stared at the cubs, who were now exploring his hovercraft with the kind of thorough attention that suggested they were memorizing every detail for future reference. "Nordstrom," he said finally, "please tell me, you have extensive documentation of these claims." Lila patted her equipment pack, which was now considerably heavier thanks to her new collection of evidence. "Every detail, sir, along with biological samples, geological specimens, and what I believe are examples of their written language." "Written language," Zithara said weakly. "Carved into crystalline matrices that store information in quantum-level fluctuations," Lila added helpfully. "I think they've been trying to establish communication with us since we first landed." One of the cubs, apparently deciding that Zithara looked lonely, climbed into his hovercraft and began making friendly conversation sounds. "It likes you, sir," Lila observed. "That's actually a very good sign. They're excellent judges of character." Zithara looked down at the cub, which was now purring and glowing with soft, peaceful colors. Despite himself, he found his natural parental instincts kicking in. "They are rather appealing," he admitted. "Sir?" Lieutenant Grex's voice crackled over the comm system. "We're receiving multiple communications from the Galactic Council. They want a full report on the human status." "Tell them," Zithara said, still staring at the cub that had decided his hovercraft was the perfect place for a nap, "that Specialist Nordstrom has successfully made first contact with a previously unknown sapient species and has established preliminary diplomatic relations. Sir? Also tell them we're going to need a bigger research facility, and possibly a diplomatic corps, and someone who knows about interspecies adoption procedures." "Adoption procedures, sir?" Zithara looked at Lila, who was now sitting on the ground while 2 cubs used her as a pillow, and the third continued to explore his vehicle. "It appears," he said with the tone of someone accepting the inevitable, "that we have 3 new permanent residents." As the rescue convoy returned to the research station, Lila found herself reflecting on the day's events. She'd set out to catalog alien plant life, and had instead discovered a complex interspecies society and gained 3 adopted children who glowed in the dark. "You know," she said to Zithara as they approached the landing pad, "when I signed up for this mission, I thought the most exciting thing that would happen was finding a new species of moss. And instead, you've potentially changed the course of interstellar diplomacy," Zithara replied. "The Galactic Council is going to want to establish formal relations with this forest civilization immediately." "They'll have to go through proper channels," Lila said firmly. "Which means going through me, and going through these 3. She gestured to the cubs, who were now all awake and staring at the approaching research station with obvious curiosity. "You realize," Zithara said, "that you've essentially become the first human ambassador to an alien civilization." "I realize," Lila said, watching one of the cubs try to figure out how the hovercraft's control panel worked, "that I'm about to become the first human to try to explain to a research facility full of alien scientists why we now have 3 incredibly intelligent, occasionally glowing roommates who may or may not understand the concept of not rearranging the laboratory equipment when no one's looking." As if to prove her point, the cub in Zithara's craft successfully activated the navigation system and seemed very pleased with the resulting holographic display. "This," Zithara said with the weary acceptance of someone whose quiet research mission had just become infinitely more complicated, "is going to require so much paperwork." "Sir?" Lila said as they touched down on the landing pad, where a crowd of curious researchers had gathered to witness their return. "Yes, Nordstrom?" "I think you're going to find that having 3 alien ambassadors who can light up a room, literally, is going to be the least of our paperwork problems." As the cubs caught sight of the gathered researchers and began making excited greeting sounds while glowing in increasingly spectacular patterns, Zithara realized she was absolutely right. But as he watched the faces of his research team light up with wonder and scientific curiosity at the sight of their new companions, he found himself thinking that perhaps some paperwork was worth it. After all, it wasn't every day that a routine botanical survey resulted in first contact with a sapient species and the establishment of interstellar diplomatic relations. Even if it did mean learning how to child-proof a research facility for 3 incredibly clever alien cubs who considered everything in the universe to be either a toy or a potential improvement project. The adventure was just beginning.